Okay, hello Cloud Gurus and welcome to this lecture. In this lecture we're going to be looking at Amazon's relational database service, and this is a lab. What we're going to do is we're going to provision a very simple little RDS instance, and then what we will do is we will go in and provision a web server. We're going to use a bootstrap script, so we're automatically going to install things like Apache, PHP, and MySQL using that bootstrap script. And then what we're going to do is we are going to go in and basically configure a connection string. A connection string is just a username, a password, and the address to connect to our RDS instance. And if all goes well, we should be able to connect to our RDS instance. So this is a lab, and you will need to log into the AWS console. Okay, so I've logged into the AWS console. I'm just going to go over to EC2 and delete the EC2 instance that I've got running so that there's no confusion. So just going to go over, go instance, and then go over to terminate. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit terminate. Now that that is terminating, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to RDS. So RDS is under databases or database. So you just click on RDS. If you've never used it before, you're going to get a splash screen sort of like this. There is a slightly new UI, which is what they're saying up here. I'm going to use the new UI going forward. And then what we want to do is we want to go over to our dashboard, and we're going to launch create an instance. So let's go down here and launch a DB instance. You can see that Amazon are very sort of heavily pushing Aurora, but we don't want to use Aurora in this particular lecture. We will have a lecture on Aurora coming up. So I'm going to use MySQL, and we are going to leave everything as default. Let's go ahead and hit next. You could click in here, only enable options eligible for RDS free usage tier. You can see as soon as you click on that, Aurora gets grayed out, so you cannot use Aurora in free tier currently. That could change though, you never know. So I'm going to go down. I'm going to leave basically everything as default. So we're going to use the general public license. We're going to use the default DB MySQL engine. We're going to use a T2 micro, so it's got 1 vCPU and 1 gig of RAM. We're not going to use multi-AZ or anything just yet. We will come to that later on. So the DB instance identifier, I'm just going to call this a Cloud Guru. And to be honest, I'm going to copy and paste this as all my username, my password, etc. DB instance identifier is just the actual name that's unique for all database instances owned by your AWS account in this region. So this is the actual instance name. So my user is a Cloud Guru. My password is going to be a Cloud Guru. I'm going to go ahead and hit next. Sorry, it's asking me to confirm my password, so I'm going to confirm in here. I'm going to go ahead and hit next. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to deploy this into our default VPC. We'll cover off VPCs later on in the course. We're going to use a default subnet group. We're going to make sure it's not publicly accessible, so we don't want to be able to connect in over MySQL on port 3306 from outside our AWS environment. Availability zone, not going to do any preferences. VPC security groups, just make sure you create a new VPC security group. You'll see why a little bit later on. And in here we've got the database name. So I'm going to call the database name a Cloud Guru. So essentially we're setting up 4 things. We're setting up the name of the instance, so the actual virtual machine that's running our databases. We're setting up the name of the actual database itself. And then we're adding usernames and passwords to connect into it. I'm going to leave everything else as default. I'm not going to do encryption just yet. And you can see, because it is a T2 micro, it doesn't even give us the option. We need a much bigger instance in order to have encryption. I will leave backups on, and I'm going to disable enhanced monitoring. I'm going to scroll all the way down and basically ready to go. And I'm going to go ahead and launch my instance. So that is now launching. It can take a few minutes depending on the size of the instance. It can take up to 5 to 10 minutes to actually see the instance. If you click on your dashboard, if you click on instances, you'll be able to see it. So just click on RDS. You can see here that it is creating. While we wait for that to create, let's go back over to services, and we'll go over to EC2, and hopefully our little instance is now being deleted. Yes, it has. And what we want to do is we're going to go ahead and launch a new instance. Now we're going to use the Amazon Linux AMI. We're going to use everything as default, and then we're going to leave everything here as default. The only thing that we are going to change is if we click on advanced details, In here, we're going to run a bootstrap script, and a bootstrap script simply runs at root level and it executes commands in a chronological order. So let's have a look at our bootstrap script. You can download this in the resources section of the course. Bootstrap scripts always start with a shebang. Shebang is just the number and then an exclamation mark, and then this is the path to our interpreter. So this is what's going to interpret all the commands that we do after this line. So on line 2, we've got yum install Apache. We're going to install PHP. We're going to install PHP MySQL. We're going to force it to install. We're also then going to update the operating system. We're then going to make sure Apache switches on even if our EC2 instance restarts. We're then going to start the Apache service so it becomes a web server as soon as that service is started. We're then going to create a little PHP page, which is just displaying our PHP info, and then we're going to output this to our var www.html directory as index.php. We're then going to go into that directory, and then we're going to go and get this little file, which is a connect.php file. And that connect.php file will look just like this. So it will say username, acloudguru, password, acloudguru, hostname, and we're going to get the hostname when we go back into RDS. And then we've got the database name, acloudguru, and in here, this is the actual PHP to connect into the SQL database. So basically it says connected to MySQL using username, and then whatever the username is, password, whatever the password is, and the host, the host name, and that's going to be the RDS endpoint, which we're going to supply later. And so it will either say connected to it, or it will have an error message saying unable to connect to MySQL database, check the database name and try again. So that is all that we're going to do. So let's grab this bootstrap script now. If you just download it and open it up in your favorite text editor, we'll go back over to our web browser. I'm just going to paste it in here, and then I'm going to go ahead and hit next to add my storage. And I'm going to leave everything as default. I'm going to go ahead and hit next to add my tags. I'm not going to add any tags. I'm going to configure my security group. I'm going to do it to my existing one, which is my web DMZ. Currently, this just allows port HTTP and HTTPS over IPv4 and IPv6. I'm going to go ahead and hit review and launch, and I'm going to go ahead and launch my web server, and I'm going to use my existing key pair, which is called my new key pair. And I'm going to go ahead and launch that. So that is now launching. What I would do is probably just wait for 5 minutes before we connect into this. You can, however, while you're waiting, just go over to your RDS instance in here, and we should hopefully have our RDS instance ready. So if we click on instances, here it is, acloudguru. And click in here, I get a nice little summary of all my instances, and here is my database endpoint. So this endpoint is a DNS address. You're never given an IP4 address for your RDS instances. You're always given a DNS address, and Amazon manage the mapping of that IPv4 address to this DNS address here. And sorry, I should be a little bit more specific when I say you're never given a IPv4. I mean a public IPv4 address for your endpoint. So copy that into your clipboard. Let's go back over to services and go over to EC2. You'll know that your Bootstrap script has run and is ready just by visiting the IP address. So if you copy this IP address and open up a new tab and hit enter, that will show this page. So we've got our PHP info page. So our web server is definitely up and running and ready to go. All our scripts have finished installing, and we're now ready to go in and configure our connection string. So you need to go over to terminal now, and we will go in and configure the connection string so we can connect to our RDS instance. Okay, so here I am in my terminal window. I'm just going to type ssh ec2-user at, and then I'm going to paste in. I've actually pasted this in from my web browser, so I'm just going to remove the HTTP. So now I've got the public IP address, and then I'm going to do -i, and I think it's called my new key pair, and go ahead and hit enter. I'm going to hit yes, and there we go. I'm going to elevate my privileges to root, so sudo su, and I'm going to clear the screen. And now I'm just going to go over to my var www.html directory, and I'm going to have a look in here. We should have two documents. We've got our connect.php and we've got our index.php. Now index.php was just the PHP info one that we saw that we created earlier with our little bash command, and then we did a wget to get this connect.php. So what I want to do now is I want to just open up my connect.php. So just type in nano connect.php, and that will open it up. And you can see we've got the username aCloudGuru, we've got the password aCloudGuru hostname, and then the DB name aCloudGuru. So the only thing we need to do is update this hostname to our RDS endpoint. So I'm just going to delete this out here, and then I'm just going to go back over to the console and get my RDS endpoint. Okay, so I'm back in the console, just going to go over to services and go down to RDS under databases. I'm going to click in there, and then I'm going to click on my instances, aCloudGuru, and I'm going to scroll down and grab my instance endpoint, which is this one here, and copy that into my clipboard. Then now let's go back over to our terminal window. So back in the terminal window, I'm going to paste that in here. So that is now my hostname. What I'm going to do is hit Control X, hit yes to exit, and then we're going to call it connect.php. Now, what you want to do is go back over to your web browser. So I'm back in my web browser. I'm going to open this up, and instead of going to the IP address, I'm going to go to /connect.php. Now, what this will do is it will hang for a little bit, and eventually we're going to get an error message. And the reason we're going to get an error message is there's still one last little thing that we need to do. When we created our RDS instance, we created a security group inside that RDS instance, and this is a separate security group to what our EC2 instance is in. So right now we've got two different pieces of the AWS cloud in two different security groups, and of course they won't be able to talk to each other by default. So we will need to go over to basically to the security group section, and we're going to need to allow communication from one security group to another. I'm just going to wait for this to time out so you can see the error message. So I'm just going to pause the video. And if you are patient enough to wait, here you go. It says unable to connect to MySQL. So let's go have a look at how we can fix this. If we just click back over to this tab, we can go over to our security groups, which is in here. So we've got our security group in here. If we click on this security group, that will launch us over to a security group sections. I'm just going to close this. So we've got our security group in here. And what we want to do is we want to go ahead and we want to go to inbound, and I'm just going to remove this filter so we can see all our security groups. So what we want to do is we want to allow an inbound security group for 3306, and we want it to allow this from our web server. So we're going to go and click in here, and we're going to go down to MySQL, which is port 3306, same with Aurora. And in here, what we can do is if we actually start typing SG, it will start to auto-populate, and we want to whitelist our web DMZ, so whichever security group that your web server is in. So mine's ending in 067. And that is it. I'm going to go ahead and hit save. So you can now see that rule down here. If we go back over to this tab, and if we hit refresh, there we go, connected to MySQL using username aCloudGuru, password aCloudGuru, host aCloudGuru, and then it's the actual database endpoint. So we have now successfully connected to our RDS instance. We've connected our EC2 instance to our RDS instance. So that is it for this lecture, guys. A common exam topic will be exactly what we just troubleshooted. One where you've got an EC2 instance in one security group and an RDS instance in another security group, and something's not connecting. That's because you need to open up port 3306 to the security group that the RDS instance is in. You need to open up that to the security group where your EC2 instance is in. So hopefully that makes sense. You go into the security group that you have your RDS instance in, you open up MySQL, and you just you allow the security group that your EC2 instance is in to talk to your RDS instance. So that is it for this lecture, guys. In the next lecture, we're going to look at a combination of multi-AZ as well as read replicas, and it's going to be a mixture of theory as well as hands-on practical lab. So if you've got the time, please join me in the next lecture. Thank you.